welcome today. And welcome to our first presentation in this year's 2015-16, Educate Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere, College of Education and Human Development Annual Lecture Series. I am Robert Hill, the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development. I'd like to thank our College of Education and Human Development technical support staff and the Dean's staff for today's lecture reception and 4:30 p.m. roundtable workshop setup. President Beavens' lecture is being videotaped and will be available for viewing on our college webpage by clicking the AAA Lecture Series banner. Immediately following the presentation today, our college is hosting a reception for President Beavens in room 31, and there is a roundtable workshop open to the public this afternoon at 4:30 p.m. in room 31. I hope that you all can join us for the reception and workshop following President Beavens' lecture. The College of Education and Human Development, through the AAA Lecture Series, now in its third year, is dedicated to educating everyone in the state of North Dakota who desires to learn, anytime, anywhere, and any place that residents in our state live and work. I'd like to thank our distinguished guest lecturer today, President Liz Beavens, who has traveled all the way from California to make this presentation on Waldorf education. This lecture is sponsored by the Department of Teaching and Learning. The topic of the lecture, Waldorf education, grew out of a suggestion from our ever insightful Professor Lars Helgeson, who saw the value in expanding our understanding of education and its delivery through learning more about the concepts and ideas as well as practical strategies for pedagogy that are central to the Waldorf developmental education model. Like Lars, I am deeply impressed with the integration of instructional method, developmental concepts, and philosophy of learning that embodies Waldorf education. And today we have a real expert in President Beavens who will help us better understand and appreciate the Waldorf approach. The planning and preparation for this lecture involved a very active and effective cross-college team. I'd like to thank Lars, Pauline Stonehouse from Educational Leadership, Josh Hunter from Educational Foundations and Research, Bonnie Gorno from Teaching and Learning, Carol Jelmstad and Audrey Pearson from the Dean's office staff for their excellent work in planning, publicizing, and initiating this lectureship, the reception and the roundtable discussion that will occur this afternoon at 4:30 p.m. in room 31. I would now like to invite Lars Helgeson to introduce President Beavens, our AAA presenter. Lars will also describe events that will occur while President Beavens is on our campus. Lars?
Yes.
You're next.
Thank you, sir. For the last 2 summers, I have attended a session on Waldorf education in public education at the Rudolf Steiner College, and I had the pleasure there of listening to lectures by Dr. Beavens, and it has been an eye-opening experience for me. Through her, I've had the pleasure of seeing education as I wish I had it when I were a child. It is truly a remarkable and lovely approach to education. And Liz understands the whole process better than anybody I know. And I have a feeling that you will be enlightened and that she will share with you her many ideas. She is an experienced teacher. She's an experienced leader, president of the Rudolf Steiner College. And I can say from personal experience, I have grown professionally and personally from knowing her. So Liz, I'd like to invite you to come and take over the meeting. And I just have a little thing that I wrote down. And this is sort of the Steiner philosophy. There's a natural unity of art, science, moral or spiritual values in education. And that typifies the nature of the Waldorf teachings. So Liz, please.
Thank you all so much. I will do my best to use my recess voice so you can hear into that. Just double checking our timing in terms of when we break from the lecture.
We'll say 10 minutes to 4.
Perfect. Thank you. So thank you all so much for inviting me here. It's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to have this opportunity to speak a little bit with colleagues about this question of education in our time, which is, I believe, why we're all here. I'll try not to have my notes in front of me too much, but I also don't want to be too far away from you. So no PowerPoint, just me. And I would like to engage with us for a little bit in some broad strokes about this question of what is Waldorf education, and why do we as Waldorf educators think that we might have something to offer in terms of discussion at this particular point in the development of education for anyone in an accessible way who seeks to be educated, and to prepare our young people for this very complex, rapidly changing world where perhaps more than at any other point in human history, we can't exactly predict what our youngsters are going to need. So that then arouses the question, what capacities can we develop in young people in order that they can step courageously and confidently into this rather unknown future and engage and contribute in lives that are fulfilling for them and for the world around them. And I think that's really at the essence for all of us as educators, as we ask how, when, why, and what we do in education. So I'm going to focus on those adverbs a little bit this afternoon. I will of necessity give some fairly broad strokes, and I'm hoping that during roundtable, or we'll try to leave a little bit of time for questions, we can unpack some of these broad strokes a little bit. Please do stop me with questions if I am being unclear or if something really peaks and is not sitting well. Aside from that, I'm going to launch and give you as much of a picture as I can within our time here. Okay? So, a little brief history. We're at a point where Waldorf, or as it's sometimes called in many parts of the world, Steiner education or Waldorf Steiner schools, is better known. It's starting to be heard more in dialogue about education. And so it's time that we reach out a little more and try to build some understanding. Just as a very brief history, although it's recent news to many in education, it's about approaching 100 years of history. The first school was established in 1919 in Stuttgart in Germany, right after World War I, a time of tremendous upheaval, with an aim of social renewal, developing the capacities that would be needed to change the future. And although that was 1919, they sound like very modern goals for educators, yeah? And at a time of chaos, this education began, developed on the philosophy of a man named Rudolf Steiner, an Austrian who was a philosopher, a scientist, a researcher, and the best known of his very wide body of work is in Waldorf education and in biodynamic agriculture and winemaking. Ironically, where it began was in the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory, so we have this interesting weaving of an education that is often considered to be very wholesome, organic, and natural with cigarettes and wine. So there you have it. It's planted quite strongly in the world. Steiner was asked to develop a school for the children of the factory workers in the cigarette factory. And he had earlier, quite a bit earlier, written about education and his view of what he called a new art of education, which he felt would be needed in order to bring about social transformation. In other words, by developing the individual, we have the possibility of developing society in a different way. He had some ideas that were radical in his time, Boys and girls were educated together. The workers' children were educated with the managers' children. Children were not separated into the academic or the crafts-oriented. Rather, everyone did everything. It was integrated. He also talked about the art of education, the art of teaching. Not only did all children engage in a broad curriculum, but the teacher engaged also in a process of self-development and learning. And the teacher was asked really to have artistry in the classroom in the way teaching was conducted. The school was very successful. Very soon it was not just workers' children, it was management children and children from the town. And this led to the development of Waldorf schools in Germany, in Austria, in Switzerland, Eastern Europe, Holland, Britain, and then in 1928 that hopped across the pond and the first school opened in New York City. A little initiative to begin with, which then grew into the American Waldorf movement. There are now over 1,000 Waldorf schools worldwide, in many, many countries, many, many very different cultural settings, ethnic settings, social settings, and we've watched this process of it adapting to time, place, and students. The social impulse remains very strong. We saw Waldorf schools develop when the war ended in Bosnia. We saw them develop in South Africa as apartheid came to an end, in Eastern Europe as the so-called Iron Curtain came down. We've seen initiatives in the Middle East to bring Islamic and Jewish children together in education, Salam Shalom. And so we see this impulse for education as a tool for social transformation at work in the world. In this country, things were a little bit different. From that first school in 1928, Waldorf education grew quite slowly and very quietly. In some ways, you could say, below the radar screen of the public system, because all of the schools for a long time were in the independent school movement, where they were able to practice an alternative philosophy of education, remarkably undisturbed. Having worked in independent education, you have a lot of freedom there. There are other costs, but you have a lot of freedom. So it grew steadily. Kindergartens became grade schools became high schools in many cases. It jumped from the East Coast to the West Coast and then began to develop in pockets across the country. So a body of practice, a body of what it meant to be an American Waldorf educator grew up. We had a huge bank of very experienced teachers. And then in the early 1990s, it took another interesting step in development where public educators, a number of whom as parents had their children in Waldorf schools, which is always an interesting little situation, began to say, well, this is fine, but what about our children? We are committed to the ideal, as I believe we all are, of public education, and how can this contribute to public education for all children? There was an access issue. And so out of that began the developments of the last 20 plus years. First with a school in inner city Milwaukee, which was designed with a very, very underserved population. And could Waldorf education make that jump into an underserved population? It was very, very successful for a number of years. Over time, as the principle changed, it faltered until finally it moved away from that original identity. But it sowed a seed. At the same time in Sacramento, my hometown now, despite my accent, a school started that was fully public, first as a magnet school and then became a district school. It thrives to this day as a fully double-tracked public Waldorf school. It's just been studied by Stanford University and we're waiting for the results, which, having had a peek at them, showed the efficacy of this approach in the public sector. The next big leap was a door made open by charter schools, with this ideal that the charter schools could be a laboratory for exploring different approaches to education. And to this time, that has largely been the home of the expansion of Waldorf into the public sector. But along with that have come some wonderful research questions about what translates where, how does it translate, what needs to be adapted to have proper accountability in the public sector, and when do we know what we know. So we're engaged in a very lively process right now of expansion, of research, and a lot of professional dialogue. There are some core principles to Waldorf education that need to be, as I said, adapted to the time and place and student. And that is up to each school and to the teachers to ask constantly. I think this is a particularly important question in education now. Who are the children who are in front of us? What is being asked of us? How do we prepare them appropriately for where they are in time and place? So this adaptation. The social mission of transformation remains. I think that is not unique to Waldorf education. It's very explicit in Waldorf education, but most of us are in education with this desire of helping to change lives, enable young people to step into the world. So that is not an exclusive one. But actually, this question of what is Waldorf education, I'm now going to cop out slightly, is deceptively difficult to answer, certainly in a concise form. But let's give it a shot, and I'm going to go through a few core principles because I think they will help to build a picture for us. Now, I cheated slightly, and I decided as I was looking at this again last night that 12 core principles had a nice ring to it. And so I'm giving you 12, but you will notice that a few of them have subsections slipped in, so I could keep to my 12. So bear with me with a little bit of creative math here, okay? If I were to step back and look at Waldorf education, I think the first core principle that I would identify is that this is a developmental approach, through and through. Of course, this is not unique to Waldorf education by any means, but this is a particularly comprehensive view, a detailed description of the developing human being actually at all stages of life. In other words, that adult in the classroom is developing just as the students develop. David Elkind, in a recent book called Giants in the Nursery, has done a bit of a history of what he considers to be leaders and developmentally appropriate educators. And there, right in the middle of this historical arc from Comenius in the 17th century to Vygotsky, is Steiner. I was delighted to see that because I think it is a sign that our dialogue is opening up. This is, above all else, a developmentally led and appropriate education. It influences those adverbs: how, when, what, who, and why we teach. I often describe the developing child and the curriculum in Waldorf education as a call and response. We see a certain phase of development in the child, and the curriculum responds with age-appropriate material, which scaffolds the development of the child, which then calls again for the curriculum. So we have this wonderful to and fro between development and curriculum and back again. We recognize in that there are very different needs and learning styles at different stages, and because this is so core, I'll describe it a little more when I've gotten through the 12. See, I've already shortened them. A second core principle, Waldorf is often known as an arts education, and the arts are indeed a core principle of this approach. Not just the arts, but the art of education, identified by educator Elliot Eisner as two streams. One, the many, many capacities that we can teach children through using the arts. So we see the arts woven in different forms, everything from painting to drama to speech to play modeling, etc., as a way for the child to grab hold of what they're learning, to personalize it. They actually make their own books, and to make it strong. But also the art of education. What is brought when, how you bring one child forward, how you manage really the symphony of a class. So the arts, number 2. Number 3, Waldorf is a holistic approach. And again, that's one of those words that's often tossed around. But this holistic view of the human being and of education and integration. We talk about hands, heart, and head, or doing, feeling, and thinking. And these are differently important at different stages of development, this developmental principle again, but they're all there for all children at every stage, well, for all human beings at every stage of education. And the argument here is we ignore one at our peril in terms of enlightened learning. So integration with different emphases at different stages, and connection also between subjects and over time. So again, we have this idea of education as a bit of a symphony. It has a musical element. The next one that is becoming more and more important, I think, both in mainstream research and in schools, is nature, the principle of nature. And as our lives have become increasingly hurried, increasingly filled with information and sensation, and as childhood, as a result, has become a little stressed, perhaps you could argue, this connection to nature, which I suspect is less of an issue here, from what I've seen, than it is in many parts of California, but I suspect also it is still an issue, that we have lost a certain natural connection to the earth and to the natural world, and the qualities that come with nature, the capacity for awe, that moment of watching a wonderful sky where you just, the importance of that for a child, wonder, and from that, a feeling of responsibility as stewards of the earth. So environmental and ecological consciousness really comes right along with that principle of nature. And of course, we now have a lot of research showing that children who are deprived of nature tend to develop challenges in learning. So this nature principle is my next one. Now another one that as educators we don't always find so easy to talk about because it's a little sensitive, it can feel more personal, but a principle of Waldorf education in terms of moral development, moral education. And this we see in the curriculum. What does it mean to be a responsible human being is a theme that comes again and again and again in an age-appropriate way. Through our relationship to nature, there's a moral quality, and through relationships with others. We are consciously fostering character development through the Waldorf curriculum. The next, I coupled two together because I needed to get to my 12. And so I put together, pretty logically, play and movement. And of course, this again changes through the developmental cycle. For the young child, play and work are one. And play is the natural learning medium for the young child, direct creative engagement in the environment. But we know from our high-tech companies that play is also important for us when we are adult learners. Companies like Google have playrooms and time to play with the idea that it frees creative thinking, allows things to synthesize, and of course for the young child, all of the other integrations that come through play. So we make time and space for play, all the way through. Another one I touched on lightly, but is a principle in its own right, and that is relationship. That education is a human activity that takes place between human beings, hopefully trusted human beings, and it is another principle that needs time. So we allow relationships to develop over time. In a Waldorf school, we take the principle of looping to extremes, and a teacher may be with a grade class for up to 8 years, but certainly for a sustained number of years for core subjects. So the child has this experience of a peer group that becomes a very tight unit. Obviously, people come in and out, and a trusted adult. And of course, the question comes, what happens if it doesn't work? We can talk about that in the roundtables. Over time. So time, our relationships are really important. Relational learning where I learn as a young child in some ways because I love my teacher. So the authority of the teacher, not authoritarian, of the teacher with these younger ones is really important for them. And through that, and through the working with the class, we develop social consciousness. Another, and I'm looping back to time a little bit, we also look at making sure we allow time for childhood. And this sounds odd until we step back and we recognize that we have created a rather child-unfriendly modern society. And so we need to allow children to find a slow pace, particularly the younger ones. We need to bring in a slow start. We need to have a time element in how we set up what is taught, when it is taught, for how long, what time of the day, what time of the year. So this time element in how we organize. And then leading into that, a subsection of this, rhythm. And that rhythm is an incredibly important principle in mode of education. This starts from the whole sweep of a year, actually the whole sweep of nursery through 12th, what belongs where. But then the whole sweep of a year, how do I organize my year in a way that is in harmony with the natural cycles of the seasons, of the rhythm? How do I organize my week? How do I organize my day? Coming back to that principle of nature, how do I ensure that the children are in contact with the subtle changes and then the not subtle changes of the seasons? What festivals from the cultures in my class might be reflected in those seasons that I can bring in? So this rhythm, there is a statement that rhythm replaces strength. If we build a classroom that is strongly rhythmical, a part of the teacher's work is done. It's actually in place. And for our modern children who often tend to be a little more on the nerve, stressed end than many of us were, this rhythm allows them to not worry about unpredictability, about what is coming next. So for the young child particularly, but all the way through, this gift of rhythm, which is also, I promise you, a gift to the teacher. Then a principle that really is connected to the integration idea, metamorphosis. What is brought at one developmental stage will transform into higher learning at a later stage. So what is developed at one stage will actually come back after it has been allowed to rest in a new form. And this principle of metamorphosis then develops a curriculum and a pedagogy that is like a spiral. But they come back in an age-appropriate form. Another one that I am hot on at the moment, as I've been doing some research now that I'm in teacher education rather than in a school, is actually how the role of a teacher is viewed. World of Education is very explicit about what we all know to be true. Teachers are important. They are important to children, they are important to society. And that also the fundamental truth that at the basis of all education, who we are as a teacher as we step into a classroom is probably the most important thing, probably. And I would be willing to defend that statement because I think it really is a truism. What we bring to the children matters, what we carry into the classroom matters, who stands before them matters, and we want those to be individuals who are striving, involved in self-development, and who demonstrate the teacher as an ongoing learner. And I can promise you, you only need to invite a teacher to do sustained looping to see that you are engaging a teacher in ongoing learning. So this inner striving and this consciousness about stepping into a classroom is something we try to develop through our teacher preparation. I think it's there for all of us. We've just tried to pull it out a little bit more. Then two more to get my 12. And don't check my math, please. For those of you who are writing these down as bullets, you may find it slightly off, but I managed to group them with 12 bullet points. One that I feel we often forget, although just driving around, seeing some of your school buildings and being in this beautiful building, it may not be an issue here, but it's an issue for many, and that is the surroundings, or what Goodlad called the ethos of a school. That actually our children, of course, are impacted by the physical environment that they're in. And one of the current challenges of our education is that often, unfortunately, the children who most need calm and beautiful surroundings are those who may be least likely to get them. But that actually a calm, not too stimulating environment with nature, one of those other principles in some way represented, impacts a child and is part of what is educating them. So we pay attention to everything down to what colors the rooms are painted, whether there is some kind of nature display that changes with the seasons, not too much clutter or stimulation, because we are dealing with children who are incredibly stimulated right now and who are exposed to an enormous amount of information. So we try to calm it down, and we try to have it age-appropriately beautiful. And we have to remember that our teenagers have that need just as much as the little ones, because they very much give the impression they couldn't care less, but actually that their surroundings impact them. And then the last is probably more of a method, but I wanted to mention it as a principle, and that is a series of activities that can be called focal activities in the classroom. And these are often non-verbal ways of working in a classroom, and that help set a mood, help with classroom management, and help with that trick of transition from one activity to another, which is where we often see teachers lose a class, momentarily at least. So one of these is that in a Waldorf school, grades 1 on, each child will be greeted in the morning with a handshake with the teacher. So there's just a tiny moment of recognition between two individuals. There's also a tiny moment for the teacher to very economically do a mini assessment of every single child coming into the classroom and have a bit of a sense of what's in the room that day. We use verses. So the school day is started with a verse that the children say together with the teacher, again to establish a mood and to say it's school time now. We use music often for transitions, where the younger ones particularly can't help themselves. They join in and get carried along. So there's this organizing principle through these activities that were identified by Bruce Ermacher in some research he did years ago. So there we have 12 key principles that I think we can pull out in Waldorf schools almost anywhere. Are we all with us enough to keep going, or are there any immediate questions? Okay, that was our moment. I'll keep going, so I'd like to have us end on time. The next, I think, is to dig in a little bit more to this absolutely core principle of development, of child development. And here we have a very coherent theory and application that ties the whole package of our Waldorf education together. Basically, at its essence, it says that a 5-year-old is not a miniature 18-year-old. And that makes complete sense until we look at how some of our education is organized, where we say we have this result we expect with the 18-year-old, we need to map it down in recognizable form to the 5-year-old in order to get that result. And we say no. There's a lawful unfolding that every child goes through. It doesn't reverse, it doesn't skip, unless there is something amiss that we need to be paying attention to. And it is a guideline that every child will walk through, but they may walk through at slightly different paces. So there's an individual component to this universal development. Waldorf education also is based quite strongly on phases of development. We are not alone in that. Piaget, Husserl, Montessori, many others have said, okay, we have these phases. We can actually see them all the way back to the ancient Greeks. And Steiner identified phases that are 7-year cycles. We're all in them, according to Steiner. We're all working on some key developmental task and evolution. So this principle of development, as I've said, dictates the what, which is our curriculum. It dictates the when, the timing of the curriculum, the how, the method with which we approach the subjects. It also has a lot to say about the who, both the teacher and the students. So as a teacher, I'm going to want to be aware of my own biography, both in terms of how it might echo the stage of development that the children are at. And it's often a wonderful thing to discuss with parents as you go into a new grade. We'd like you to try and remember what it was like for you to be a third grader. Where were you living? What was it like? And that can be a tremendous and very easy support for parenting. But also for the teacher. If I had a miserable time in third grade, it's probably good if I know that as a teacher. So I have the chance of not bringing that into the classroom. So we scaffold as each child develops by moving forward, by spiraling back, but by keeping them on this age-appropriate progression. These 7-year cycles, we obviously don't educate for all of them. Increasingly, we are educating very, very young children in Waldorf and in education in general. And of course, the younger the child, the more we hope we are working with the parents. But 0 to 7 takes us into the grades, 7 to 14 through the grades, 14 to whenever we throw them out, and they finish off either in the workplace or in college, the third cycle. So we're particularly involved in those first 2.5 cycles. The first one, from 0 to 7-year-old, if you can imagine for a moment a tiny tot, we're very, very engaged in helping to support physical growth. That can be identified in many ways as a key task of the first 7 years. A primary learning modality of the first 7 years, we only have to be around a toddler to know this, is imitation. These powerful forces of you do, I copy. So we want to set up healthy imitation, protection. I have a tiny grandson, and it brings out, an infant brings out our natural urge to protect. And that is really true all through this very impressionable first phase. And we want them somehow to have a feeling that life has a goodness to it. We're establishing a foundation for the rest of life. So as we organize their schooling, we want to find ways of supporting that as a gift for life. We want them learning from loved adults. We bring, with our little ones, right through to first grade, many, many home-based activities. Things that once would have been natural, but that have gone away. So we see children sweeping, chopping vegetables, washing the painting rags, helping to clean, sewing, gardening, digging, building, carpentry, so that their limbs are very busy. Of course, we can step back as educators and make huge lists of all of the pre-academic skills they're developing. Science concepts, social studies, arithmetic, language skills, etc. But there is this blurring between work and play, that we have them engage in meaningful activity. It's real work with real tools. Our play, we make a lot of time for play with our younger ones, is open-ended. The connection to nature is very strong, and we work with them through the development with the very little ones to that wonderful point somewhere around 2, the terrible 2s, where they have a stronger sense of I, through the 5-year-old who begins to be able to plan in a different way, so we watch the play changing, but we make sure we're supporting it, into this ability to inwardly picture, follow directions of more than 1 or 2 points, and to be ready for then we begin academic instruction. So although there is a very rich pre-academic build with our young ones, we don't use school tools, and it looks radically different from many kindergartens. Then we go into the second cycle of around 7 to 14, and here we say what we are most actively working on is the imagination. This wonderful human gift to picture, to to be moved in the feeling realm to create something that is mine because of this gift of imagination. Here we work on what really should be another core principle. We use a tremendous amount of image and story. The oral tradition is very, very strong in Waldorf education. We give a lot of hands-on experience that will slowly come more to rest as they get older. We help them through the challenges that often come around 9, when the child feels more independent and therefore more alone, and around 12, when that wonderful gift of causal thinking comes in and the capacity to be critical. So we need to channel that. Yeah, we all know it. So we can see, whereas in the first 7 years, thought is really developed through these will activities of doing. It's not that they're not thinking. It's a very connected experience. Now in the second phase, we see that thinking capacities are really being developed by things that move the imagination and the feelings. So during these years, we want them to have this feeling that life is beautiful. Life is something I'm actively engaged in, I know about, and it's beautiful. These are the years when we have a solid teacher for a number of years, ideally up to 8. Doesn't always work out, but up to 8. It's a remarkable experience as a teacher to make that journey. And we use a principle of loving authority that often with the younger ones, you have to work really hard, in my opinion, as a teacher of younger children, to have the children not like you. They give their respect, their love, their desire to work for you freely as a gift. And we then responsibly need to stand there for them as a representative of what it means to be an adult, what it means to be a human, and to help shape them, their social dynamics, their individual development, help them with their developing their capacities, and help remove the obstacles that every child has on her or his path. Every child. Some of them are just a little more obvious than others. And every child freeing the gifts that they all also have. The wonderful thing about the breadth of the Waldorf curriculum is that every child will find an area of expertise, and possibly even more importantly, every child will find an area of challenge. So there's a different social relationship where we're all having these different experiences together. Then we get to our wonderful junior high and high school students, 14 and on. These are very rough, these ages. And now we have this real awakening of the thinking and this amazing capacity to question. And what we're trying to do is develop free thinking individuals who can make thoughtful, creative decisions. So our key here is working directly. Now we're developing thinking through thinking, but we can't forget the feeling and the doing. But now this capacity to think is really primary, and they will exercise their teachers. They no longer really have to like their teachers, but it's important, they do, but it's really important for them to respect what the teacher knows. So we want experts in subjects in the high school, which is a traditional high school model. And now, rather than life is good or life is beautiful, we want them to be coming to a feeling of life is true. I know what truth is. Particularly important, I think, in this age where we have become so very skillful with the virtual. And it's getting harder and harder to discern what is real and what is not. So this question of what is true, I think, is an issue for all of us as educators, as a goal of education, to be able to discern. Yeah? So very briefly, in our last few minutes, I'd like to talk about a couple of things about the outcomes and the research on Waldorf education, because this can all sound very wonderful, but because it's often known as a sort of an artsy, granola eating, etc., education, there can be the question, well, fine, if we introduce this into schools, will our children be able to be effective, responsible, economically productive members of society, which is, after all, one of our key goals. I hope it's not the only goal, it's certainly the explicitly stated goal of education. Yes, the news is good. They may become an artist. We do need to let parents know that. but it will be out of choice, out of a range of possibilities. I have to be a little cautious with the research because the American research has been drawn primarily from young people who went through independent schools. That is now changing as we have more public schools and as we have public high schools. But we have to be a little bit cautious, except the American research is backed up by studies in Sweden, Brazil, the United Kingdom, and Australia. And they all are showing some similar profiles of graduates from Waldorf schools. So in this country, we see that as great relief to parents, about 94% of them go on to college. More than twice the national average take a gap year before they do that, which is a very interesting thing. When they get to college, over 80% of them graduate, which is high, as we all know. We're at the college level here. And surprise, surprise, 40 to 50% of them go into the sciences or technology or engineering. So although they can knit, and they can paint, and they can do drama, they actually are choosing rigorous academic subjects and succeeding. Oddly and interestingly, many of them go into the fields of technology, media, graphic design, etc., etc. So in an education that says let's keep the screens out for as long as possible, we actually have young people who are very successful in those fields. A couple of keys that are important to me on the human level. The research on Waldorf graduates shows that relationships and family really matter to them, that many of them retain some kind of artistic or creative practice right through life, and that what their professors in universities note, I don't know whether there have been any Waldorf graduates here, but that these are young people who show up for office hours, even in the great big, several hundred lectures, because they assume that this is happening with education, that they have a confidence and a willingness to try new things. Because all the way through this extraordinary curriculum, they have done everything from knit a pair of socks to help build a structure, as well as formal academics. So there's a willingness to engage. A couple of other research points. We are now seeing very, very clearly that social emotional learning is critical for academic learning. There was a study, and I don't have the name of the lead investigator this summer out of Yale, that basically said, if you want your children to succeed in academics, make sure that your kindergarten is all about social emotional learning. I would like that maybe plastered on a few walls well east of here, but that's just an opinion. Another is that actually we're finding a very interesting phenomenon that brain research is catching up with some of the principles of Waldorf education. As we learn more and more about sensory integration, bilateral integration, the challenges that can come when a child has not overcome certain things in the physical body, the development of the tripartite brain that really does say doing, feeling, thinking in that order. So we are delighted as brain research comes out and we go, look at that, how interesting. So that's been affirming for us as Waldorf educators that there really is a difference between phonemic and phonetic reading instruction. Some of these things that we have had as practices that we've seen success in, we're now actually able to start validating. And I would say as a weakness that Waldorf education has been weak in the area of research. So we're now starting to do more of it. The question of the Common Core, as Waldorf has become a public method, we've really had to address this. And I was engaged in a process, a research process with the Alliance for Public Waldorf Education, where we tried to line them up. It's available online, and it was very interesting. The Common Core I can speak about. It's a very worthy attempt to raise the levels for all young people and to broaden our idea of learning and instruction. It is not developmentally based in its construction. It just is not. It's this mapping down with very discrete goals. So, however, it is bringing in some new practices, and I think, again, it's a wonderful way for us to look at Waldorf education. Relationships and relationally based learning There is a strong body of research that shows that as little as one caring adult can change the educational success of a child. So this important role of the teacher we see again and again and again. And these people who are willing to go into teaching and work with our young people need to be celebrated and supported appropriately. We don't do that economically in Waldorf schools, but there are many other supports. And so one final point, we've talked from the late 20th century until fairly recently about 21st century skills. That seems a little tired now that we're 15% through the 21st this century. But what we do know is that we are living in a time of unprecedented, literally unprecedented information, change, technology, influx of knowledge, and that many, many things have profoundly changed. We are seeing challenges with human connection, along with all of the gifts, and we are seeing a workplace that has really changed. In the Bay Area, people are changing jobs every couple of years in the high-tech industries. It's very fluid, and they change significantly. So we're seeing something new. There is some evidence that actually some brain functions are changing. And so I turned to, although right now this is getting a little old, Daniel Pink, who wrote a book called Whole New Mind. And he, several years ago, described some principles of 21st century learning, which he calls the conceptual age, the age of the entrepreneur and the creator. And these are design, story, symphony, empathy, play, and meaning. And these we see strongly represented in the Waldorf approach. And I think it's around those kinds of principles where we can really be in dialogue about how we educate, why we educate, and for what purpose. So I am delighted, as I said, to be in this kind of professional situation with other educators and people interested in education. And I look forward to continuing an exploration of what does this mean, does it have relevance, what might that relevance be, and on what basis do I say some of these things. So thank you all so much for listening, and I hope that this has sparked some thoughts about our current practices and maybe some questions. So thanks very much.